In a quiet town, there stood an old clock tower that hadn't ticked for almost 40 years. Every morning, people passed by it like it was part of the background, a dead piece of history no one cared to fix. But there was something strange about that clock. They said it stopped on the same day the town lost its faith, the day everything went wrong. The glass was cracked, the hands frozen at midnight, and yet, even after all these years, no one dared to touch it. Some said it was cursed, others said it was waiting for something or someone. One evening, as the sun went down and the sky turned gold, an old man stood beneath that clock, staring up like he was listening to something only he could hear. His name was Elias, a clockmaker who had spent his whole life fixing broken things except this one. The wind brushed past his face, carrying the faint sound of silence. He whispered, "Why did you stop?" That moment set everything in motion, not just the story of a clock, but of a man who believed that even time could be healed if only you had enough faith. The story you're about to hear isn't about gears and metal. It's about belief, loss, and the power that makes the impossible move again. Because sometimes, time doesn't stop by accident. Sometimes, it waits for faith. Elias lived in a small wooden house at the edge of town, filled with clocks of every kind. Some ticked too fast, some too slow, and some had stopped completely. He spent his days bent over his workbench, tightening screws, polishing glass, and whispering to the clocks as if they could hear him. He wasn't rich, and most days, he barely earned enough to eat. But fixing clocks was all he knew. It was what gave him purpose. People in town called him the man stuck in time. They laughed when he passed by, saying, "He's still trying to fix the dead clock in the square." Yet, Elias never answered back. He'd just smile, wipe his hands, and keep walking. Deep down, he wasn't trying to fix just a clock. He was trying to fix something inside himself. Years ago, when the clock stopped, he lost more than time. He lost his belief that things could get better. Since then, every tick of every clock he repaired felt like a small fight against that silence. Each time he heard one start ticking again, it reminded him that not everything broken is meant to stay that way. Still, the big town clock, the one that everyone had given up on, haunted him. Every night before he slept, he could see it in his mind, frozen, waiting. And though he didn't know why, he felt like that clock was waiting for him. One morning, Elias finally decided to face the clock that had haunted him for so long. He walked to the town square, carrying his small wooden toolbox, the same one he'd used since he was a boy. The square was empty, except for the sound of wind brushing through the trees. The clock tower stood tall but tired, covered in dust and spider webs, its hands still frozen at 12. He placed his hand on the cold metal and felt a strange chill run through him, as if the clock was alive but asleep. Climbing up the narrow stairs, he reached the gears inside, and what he found broke his heart. The pendulum, the very heart of the clock, was cracked right down the middle. He spent hours trying to fix it. He replaced screws, oiled gears, polished every corner, but no matter what he did, the clock wouldn't move, not even one tick. Frustrated, he sat on the floor, staring at the pieces scattered around him. "Why won't you start?" he whispered. For a moment, there was nothing, just silence. Then, a small voice inside him said, "Because you don't believe anymore." He froze. It wasn't the clock that was broken, it was his faith. The same hands that once brought life to countless clocks now trembled with doubt. As he sat there in that dusty tower, he realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes, things don't stop because they're broken. They stop because we stop believing they can move. Again, the air in the tower felt heavy, almost alive. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then tick. A small sound, barely there. Elias froze, his eyes wide. Another tick followed, and then another. The clock's gears began to turn slowly, painfully, like a heart learning to beat again. Then suddenly, it came to life. The hands started to move, the bells above began to ring, and the whole tower trembled with sound. People ran out of their homes, staring in disbelief, as the clock that had been silent for 40 years came alive once more. Tears filled Elias's eyes as he looked up, whispering, "It was never the clock. It was me." The sunrise poured through the windows, lighting his face as the clock struck one, each chime echoing, like a heartbeat of faith. Returning to the town, the sound of the clock's chime spread through every street, waking people who had grown used to silence. Families stepped outside, children pointed at the tower, and the elders stood still, their eyes wide in disbelief. For years, that clock had been nothing more than a reminder of failure, a symbol of everything that had been lost. Now it stood tall again, alive, strong, and shining in the morning light. Elias climbed down from the tower slowly, his hands shaking but his heart calm. People gathered around him, asking how he had done it, what kind of magic he used. He smiled softly and said, "It wasn't magic. It was faith." They didn't understand at first. He told them how the clock never needed fixing with tools, it needed belief. The clock stopped the day people stopped believing in better days, he said. It stayed silent because no one thought it could live again. His words hit something deep inside everyone standing there. The truth was, the town had been broken long before the clock stopped. People had stopped helping each other, stopped dreaming, stopped caring. But now, as they listened to Elias, they realized that the sound they were hearing wasn't just a clock ticking, it was hope waking up again. The moment the townspeople began to believe, time started to move, not just in the tower, but in their lives too. That evening, as the town settled down, the clock's steady ticking filled the air like a heartbeat. People sat on their porches, smiling softly, listening to a sound they thought they'd never hear again. Elias stood beneath the tower, watching the sunset paint the sky with gold. He felt no pride, only peace. He knew the lesson wasn't about fixing a clock, it was about remembering what keeps life moving. He whispered to himself, time never really stopped. We just forgot how to believe. As night fell, a group of children ran past him, laughing, their voices echoing under the glowing tower. Elias smiled, his eyes wet but full of warmth. The clock had given the town something they'd lost, faith in what couldn't be seen. Before leaving, he placed his old notebook at the base of the tower, with one final line written inside. Faith doesn't keep time, it creates it. Then he walked away slowly, disappearing into the quiet streets. The clock continued to tick behind him, steady and strong, as if it were keeping promise for everyone who had ever lost hope. And from that day on, whenever someone in the town started to lose faith, they would pause and listen to remind themselves that as long as the clock still ticked, it meant belief was alive.